from the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in, explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today, I'm very pleased joining me from the US, David Boscia. David, thank you very much for being with me here today. The way I love to do is I keep it to my guests to introduce themselves. I know you have a long experience within the IT domain, and I would love you to share with us your experience and your journey, and then we can take the discussion from there.
Sure, I'm excited for the podcast here today, and I have 32 years of experience at NCR Corporation as a executive director in the IT realm across various functions, but certainly end user compute, identity and collaboration and security items, hardware and software asset management are all things that I touch. It's really the end user experience that I managed throughout my career. So 32 years of experience, I'm happy to share a lot of things that maybe others listening to today's podcast can gain experience with.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you very much, David, for being here with me today. So I know, majority of your experience was, managing large numbers of endpoint. And, even when I think about it from my personal perspective, I was working in a university and we used to have a couple of hundreds, let's say, but for you, it was like tens of thousands. So it's a daunting task. So would you tell me from your experience what are some of the biggest challenges you have encountered in this area?
Sure. Yeah. Thousands of endpoints are difficult to manage. Even if you've got, a process that is very good for one, when you open up a global community, you find that there's many challenges in reaching that global community from a centrally managed environment. Visibility to the asset, right? They may be offline, they may not, be online, and you want to make sure you have a clear site to access and administer and update those endpoints. That's often a challenge. You might have customer engineers working in the field and don't boot up their laptop very often. So it becomes a challenge for you to reach those assets, to update them on a regular basis. You also have, the typical resistance of change from your employee population. I'm too busy to make this upgrade today. I've got other things to do. This is going to take 10, 15 minutes of my time, and I'm getting ready for something and I want to postpone it. There's a lot of reasons why people resist change. So you have to plow through those types of challenges to keep your environments updated. And of course, you've got variety of endpoints. We're not just, Windows shop, we're Mac shop, and you use different tools for different environments all the time. So you have to have the skill sets across those different tools and repeated processes that work consistently across all your endpoints.
That's a great perspective. So, having a heterogeneous, let's say, environment, David, and this is just a question that popped out of my mind. Is it a myth to say we can truly unify the management? Because, the reality is the operating systems, are built in different ways. So Windows is not like Mac, it's not like Linux, it's not like Androids and so on. So, and because, the reason I'm asking you this, David, is when it comes to management, so we need to talk a lot also about compliance and security, and especially across large number of endpoints. So is it is there a way, or do you think the technology is converging in a way that we can really have this kind of a convergence to manage these different OSs and to make sure that the compliance and security across all these endpoints are there.
I think we're headed in that general direction. I'm not sure we're there yet, but when you talk about tools to manage your environment across all the different endpoints that I discussed, you definitely have tools that say I can do it all, right? But sometimes you go after best in practice. The I guess the top magic quadrant, Gartner Magic Quadrant type resources for each of the different areas. You'll find different tools at the top. But I think we're not there yet and having single set of tools that does it all. But I think we're headed that way. Now, the other thing to think about when we look at those operating systems, they're all getting updates at different intervals and times and things like that, and some of them might have more sensitive or more concerning issues that arise where you have to go after them in a different interval. So you're going to have a lot of variety coming from the vendors. So you have to be prepared to sequence and manage them, and using one tool versus two tools may not make that much of a difference.
Got you. Now, of course, talking about the tools, so but there must be kind of a strategy that you found like most effective, and I'm pretty sure also like David, you can shed some lights on. It's not only about the large number of the devices and like the mix of operating systems, and I think what happened, especially after the pandemic, like people start to be like also like distributed more, remote work. And it became like also hard to to make sure that these devices, like these endpoints, are like getting the latest updates and the latest patches. So what was the strategy, or what's the strategy you think which was the most efficient and effective, whether like it's tool, whether it's like a strategy in overall, to make sure that the endpoint management is done the right way?
Yeah. You need to be able to measure your progress, regardless of whatever tool you use. What's your coverage? When we talk about world-class patching, you're over 95% patched on a monthly basis, or even more aggressive than that. So, how do you make sure that you're 95%? So you're using some of your tools to generate reports or endpoint inventory reports and things like that. And you're constantly chasing failed updates. So you need to have resources dedicated to ensuring that you're, going after the failed events. And then on the other hand, you need to enforce compliance with controls. So, I mentioned before, there's some resistance, right? While you can resist to update, you might have that level of control. At some point, you're going to lose access to the network, right? And those are posture checks that you might put in place to make sure that people are advancing. And if they don't, there's consequences, and you can't get your job done if you don't have access to the network, right? So there's different ways of doing that. You have to be sensitive to, business continuity and making sure that you have the right level of time to offer an employee to do an update, or what they have to do on their side has to be reasonable. And then at some point you just cut them off. That's a strategy that kind of goes across the board with all things security. There's a balance between business continuity and the security controls that you put in place.
Yeah, David, just out of curiosity here, but because you said like people usually they resist the change, and we know this, like especially when it comes to technology changes. Have you seen, for example, removing, for example, of course, and not to force it in a bad sense, but like, let's say we want to do something, so we need a little bit to kind of at the same time empower the user, but at the same time remove like the full access or the full admin access from them. Like, have you seen this strategy something that might work also?
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned, at some point they get cut off, and that's the end of the cycle. But what we've done before in the past is we give them kind of some nagging pop-ups, that say, okay, here's the countdown. You can only defer this one more time, before you lose access to the network. So, that's, somewhat of a compromise to give them a little bit of time, to make the deferrals that they need to get other things done in the business, but knowing that there's some hard, point at the end of that cycle where they're going to get cut off.
Absolutely. Now, of course, part of managing endpoints, and this is something very critical, in the whole environment, which is, access and identity management. And I want like to discuss a couple of things with you, David. So, IAM, or like identity management as it's known, it's very critical for cybersecurity. So, can you elaborate, the importance of this technology and the integration of the systems? Like, for example, if someone's still using Active Directory, I'm not sure if it's still the case. I know at least here in the Middle East, people still use the on-prem Active Directory, but of course, Microsoft is pushing for Azure AD or Intra ID as they are calling, and like other systems, like you name it, the Oracle ERP, the Workday. So, walk us through, why, this component of identity management is so critical, and, takes good part of managing also the endpoints.
Sure. I might be obvious, but I'll state it anyway. The businesses must control who has access to what business functions in their company. Just let's say finances, right? So let's say you use Oracle ERP for your finance system. Well, you don't let everybody in your company access certain functions in the Oracle ERP environment. So, the way to mitigate that is you have identities, and your identities are tied to roles within the business that do certain functions. So that marriage between identities and roles and functions is critical to business operations on a regular basis. But how do you ensure that the identity, that you're using is truly that person? We know that there's fraud, right? But we also know that, businesses must keep roles and responsibilities and who has access to roles up to date as well. So group management are things that, the business is responsible to make sure that the right people have access to the right systems at the right time. So, those are to me, clear identity and access management challenges for a business is that, you need identities, you need roles and responsibilities. Now, how do you keep that all clean? How do you make sure you are who you are in your identities, and that whoever you are, you have the right access or roles and responsibilities enabled in your systems?
Absolutely. Now, regarding also the best practices, David, and we know, and I remember from my days when I was, on that side of the table, is, managing the life cycle of the identities, right? And this is related a little bit even to the, full picture of managing, the asset life also as well. And, when the user leaves the organization, so we make sure, like, of course, he or she, they will return, their assets, but also like it's connected to, the identity. And because if, we don't follow the best practices, again, we're going to have some risk. So what are the best practices, that, you've seen beneficial in managing the life cycle of identities within organization?
Sure. Yeah, this is, I guess, a long answer,
Sure.
because there's so much under the hood to that question. But obviously you need to manage your identities through the entire life cycle, from onboarding to offboarding. You need to, make sure, as I mentioned before, you have the right identities in motion, tied to the right roles and right access. And to do so requires a lot of, controls and audits and things like that in between. But first and foremost, you have to have security baked into your design of everything in identity from the beginning of the life cycle to the end of the life cycle. Example is strong authentication methods. What's the right level of authentication required for any given application? You might have different tiers of applications with different level of impact to the business. And based on that, you develop your authentication method. So authentication could be, just real simple access. If you're on the network and you're a managed device, you have access, right? Another might be, okay, well, let's present your credentials in a little bit stronger way. We need MFA. And, we can go down that security path into something a little bit less frictionless, like, passwordless and things like that over time. But once you have all those controls in place, you need to audit them, right? So, are those controls effective? Do you have any opportunities to address on a regular basis? There's always opportunities where you have to, not just patching, but other things that come up where you say, okay, I'm aware of this opportunity. It's rated X on our security concern or risk radar. Therefore, I'll get to it in Q4. So you have to prioritize all this work. There's a lot of work. And kind of stepping back, you also need to train your users, right? So from day one, they need to be security aware. There's all kinds of ways to do that, but you want to train your all your users with your security policies and what they can and can't do with their identities. Because in the end, we all know this, that identities are most often breached by the end users making mistakes, whether it's a phishing or otherwise. An end user, their credentials can be compromised. And so you train them on a regular basis. You've got lots of onboarding that happens on a monthly or even a weekly basis. And you want to make sure that they're introduced with all the security awareness that they need. And for those that have been with the company for a while, you need to refresh them. And capture the fact that they were trained, right? So you need to hold your users responsible for security just as much as your controls, making sure that your controls are in place. And then, by design, we're talking about like zero trust principle, right? So think about ways of managing your identities, knowing that you have access to nothing until you're granted access. There's different ways of doing that, and a lot of different tools and services under the zero trust principle. But that's quite common nowadays. And you need all your systems need to be scalable. So you can't throw everything at the help desk. We know that the help desk can't solve, all the problems. Well, yes, they can. There's limitations, and who all wants to interact with the help desk on a regular basis? They want to be self-sufficient and things like that. So think about scalability of your services. Think about things like self-service tools and services. I mentioned earlier, like group access. That could be very easily managed by a self-service environment where you request access to a group that enables you access to Oracle financials. And somebody who manages or owns that group will get engaged in a workflow with the approval process to make sure that you are who you are and you should have access to that Oracle financials environment. So that's an example of the flexibility that you need to establish in your overall design plan.
Right.
And automation, right? Let's push aside the whole process of self-service, but let's automate things where we can, right? We know that we're hiring a financial person into our organization. Let's automate access into Oracle financials out of the gate. Role-based access should be part of your onboarding process. And that should just flow naturally and not engage a person to be doing that. Of course, you have to validate the identity up front. And we'll get into more of that discussion later.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned passwordless, David, and I know people are complaining since long time, like why we still use passwords, right? So it's a very hot topic. I know like there are like multiple initiatives by big vendors such as Microsoft, and rest of some of the big security players in the market that are pushing for passwordless. So first, like, in simple terms, like even for someone who might not be familiar, so if you can explain, the concept of passwordless, although like it's obvious from the name, but uh, what I want also, David, to discuss, or if you can shed light on, is how I can implement it, and is it easy actually to implement it? So I know it's kind of loaded question, but and I think it's very important part, which is related to what you were discussing before about the authentication, which is again, it's the beginning of any cyber attack starts there. So I will let you explain that to us, David.
Yeah. Yes. Strengthening our identities, is something that's always, ongoing. It's a journey. And it's not just something that you just turn on with a single configuration to get more secure. And the term passwordless, presents an opportunity to the end user who's scrambling to keep track of all their different passwords and all these different systems. We know that's a constant struggle. And we know because we're measuring it with calls to the help desk and other things, right? So we know that our end users are struggling with their passwords. And when that happens, they might get, fatigued or make mistakes, and their credentials get stolen or lost by, cyber criminals, et cetera. So when you reduce the friction at the endpoint with the users, remove the need for passwords, it makes your environment much more secure, period. And going beyond that, there's different, editions of passwordless where you get to a true identity verification or validation step, which is kind of the next big thing. And identity is to, tie a lot of different things up front to, getting a validation on an ID, and then, storing that validation, and then using it for your next access. So it could be a combination of video. We know Windows Hello is a very simple, passwordless approach on a Windows machine, but is it secure, and could it be more secure? Yes, it could be more secure. And that's what I'm talking about with identity validation, where we take those types of concepts to the next level and use, the video interrogation along with some identity, presentation. Could be a driver's license or passport or whatever combination of credentials that ensure you are who you say you are. And then that identity gets repurposed. So, that's all, like I said, a journey. But it's all with less friction on the endpoint, and more security with our identity in the end. The win-win for everybody.
Absolutely. But just one point regarding, few things that are happening currently, David, and because, just in a few weeks, I did some interviews. So there are concerns, when it comes, for example, to anything that is related to video or images that, AI can fake it. So how you are seeing, this blending of AI and deep fake and, with the passwordless concept, and people are like scratching their heads now, with AI actually, of course, it's being used as we speak by the bad actors, and they're going to leverage this to break in. So how do you see the technology, kind of being able to solve this dilemma, I would say, between leveraging, passwordless and, the things you mentioned versus, again, bad actors, again, leveraging the same technology to break in?
Right. Yeah. So, that's a great point. We know, that in terms of cybersecurity, AI is a strong point for both sides of the fence. It's a strong point to help us improve our, attack identifications and threat actors and things like that. But on the other hand, the cyber criminals have that same type of technology and are using it, like the deep fakes you mentioned. But I think IDV in the approach and the strategy there is going to thwart those concerns because if you think about video, you're more likely to be using some infrared camera or capabilities that a pure image itself won't satisfy the security requirements. So I think, and fingerprints, you can combine it with a bunch of different things that you feel is most secure for your organization. And that could vary by application. So one thing we didn't talk about was these adaptive controls.
Sure.
Whether you apply adaptive to, MFA or identity verification, you could have progression or different levels of controls. And this whole fatigue thing, if you go from MFA into towards passwordless, you may have a tough, journey because you have legacy applications. Maybe they don't support, modern authentication, just LDAP or whatever. And it's a journey for you to get to that endpoint, but you can have stages to get there. Adaptive MFA is, I would say, a stage of getting to passwordless. And to answer your question specifically on the AI front, we know that MFA is, being addressed by cyber criminals and not as secure as we'd like it to be. And it's a piece of that journey. So as long as you're somewhere in the middle to the endpoint, you're vulnerable. And there is no endpoint. As much as we describe opportunities to get better, cyber criminals are on the other side doing the same and finding ways to get holes into your identity. But we can do better as we go through this journey, and the faster we can go, the more we can invest into getting to those endpoints, the better off we'll be.
Right. So, David, do you think, what you just mentioned, which is the combination of passwordless plus, the adaptive, concept that you also talked about. So do you think we're going to see it mainstream in the couple of few years from now? Because are we going to see people stop using actual passwords finally? Because, and I think, again, from returning to the endpoint, and this is something I used to see, and I still see sometimes, people put their passwords on sticky notes, right? And they put it just in front of them. So when do you think we're going to stop see this completely?
Yeah, I've used the word journey a bunch of times in today's conversation, and that's what it is. You might focus on, let's say, your financial system, saying, okay, this one here is most important to me. I want to go all in on getting to passwordless for Oracle ERP, right? You may choose that battle, but to say that your company is passwordless is going to be a journey because you've got all these different applications with different capabilities, and it, at NCR, 130-year-old company, we've got a lot of legacy applications that it's just going to take a while to put on that cap and say passwordless, right? It's not a simple answer to your question. And there's many companies that are passwordless today. I had a conversation with Microsoft, who claims to be passwordless. They of course are eating their own dog food, and it's working for them, Windows Hello and all that, right? So that works great, but okay, turn the page. In a typical large company, maybe all your endpoints can't support Windows Hello. Maybe you still have Windows 7 out there, Windows, 10 machines that don't have the right, chipset to get to passwordless, right? So those are things that large companies need to, weed out. And over time in this journey, I call it, get to a better spot. But there is no date I can give you, but I can tell you it's happening today.
Right.
And it might be application by application. You're probably quicker in a small, medium business to get to that endpoint. But for larger companies, it's a journey.
Absolutely. Just, to maybe, and it's not a joke really, but I remember a couple of, not that long ago, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, before the pandemic. Yeah, it was like 2019. So I went to a place, and again, to the point of people, how they resist the change. So so I've seen their one application, and they told me like, look, this application we cannot touch. And I asked why. They said, yeah, because it's a legacy application, and we don't we don't know how to change it. We came here, we found it, and I said, okay, what it has inside, and it figured out like I think they had a SQL 2005 or something, which is not supported anymore, even by Microsoft, and it's running on top of a Windows. I think it was a 2003 server also as well. So I said, oh wow, right. So why don't change it, guys? I said, okay, it's working like now. We don't want to touch it. Let it break, and then we would see. So like this is something really realistic, David. I've seen it hundreds of times, I would say, in my career.
Yeah, for sure. So my advice there is to engage with your security team, cyber security team, and assess the risk of that application based on what you know, right? The data that it manages, the business functions that it supports, and what does that mean to the business if it were to be compromised? Get a risk score on, right? So once you have a risk score on it, you'll know a little bit more about how to go after that. And if you find that that's a high risk item or a concern, then you build a plan to mitigate that risk. And mitigation doesn't necessarily mean you get to that endpoint. It could be containment, right? Access into this environment is fully contained, and you can't do this and this and this in and out of that environment, right? So there's ways to contain applications that you find are risky for other reasons that you can't fix until such point that you can fix. Until you can upgrade the environment, you contain it.
Right. David, we mentioned AI, but in another context. But now, I'm curious actually to know how AI is being leveraged currently from an IT management and endpoint management perspective. Do we start to see some really cool technologies coming out, or are we still like waiting for the next breakthrough, cutting edge technology that would change even the way we think about IT management and endpoint management specifically? Where are we currently with the AI?
Yeah, I'm excited to what AI offers to the IT organization. And at least in my organization, we buy a lot of tools versus building our tools environments. So we do lean on our vendors to bring that AI capability into the platforms and services that we use. And we're seeing more and more of this come through with each of our applications. Every vendor that we talk to, if they're not talking AI in a conversation, you should be surprised. So it's here. It's going to have an impact in the context of endpoint control and in identity. It's already there. You see it in a lot of endpoint security tools that are looking at a lot of different variables in environments like your SIEM environment. Gets all these. Your SIEM environment will collect all these events and activities in mass, right? So it's a big database of events that are happening. Imagine if your AI environment taps into that, daily event log and can bring that context to you for simple transactions like logging into the network. You can understand a little bit more about where you've been, where you've traveled, the logins recently, and whether it makes sense to allow you access. Or, I mentioned MFA and a journey towards passwordless. If you implement MFA today, you might get to a point where you get MFA fatigue. These types of adaptive controls can tap into environments where it knows a little bit more about you, who you are, and can determine whether you even need an MFA prompt, right? So even though you might have MFA set up across the board for all your applications, if you prompted everybody every time for MFA, they would definitely get MFA fatigue and just start answering yes, 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 regardless of where it came from. But these types of AI controls can be more, add that adaptive element to your controls, as an example, to reduce MFA fatigue. So there's a lot of different applications. That's just one example. But there's a lot of things when you look all the way down at the end of identity verification and validation. There's elements of AI in those controls that are rather new to the market today as well.
Absolutely. Do you see, David, like especially with the Copilot from Microsoft and these other generative AI tools that are coming up every day, are you seeing like really having an impact on minimizing, let's say, the workforce required, for example, to put the people who interact, I mean the service desk mainly, so are we seeing like more adoption like in that area? Because of course what you mentioned is very important. This is what majority of the people they don't see. So anything which is an AI technology that works in the back end on infrastructure layer, let's say, and facilitate and ease our lives, but people they don't see it. So what usually the end users will see the bots, which everyone, when you talk about AI, people think that it's only like Copilot and ChatGPT style. Of course, it's not that that's all, but I mean, this is what usually people will interact with. So what are you seeing there? Are we coming to have like a kind of an AI agent sitting within the IT department helping, your team, taking care of the tickets, and, even because now we have the capability of generating voice and even maybe taking a call and guiding them? What are we expecting on that side?
Yeah, great question. When we think about IT and IT support and operations, AI is going to have a dramatic impact. And let's just use a simple example of calling the help desk or not calling the help desk and using a chatbot, right? Our chatbots are evolving using AI dramatically. Used to be where, okay, I can't find what I need out of this chatbot. I got to call the help desk. I want to talk to someone because, this chatbot isn't working for me. I'm sure you've all experienced that. Well, I think that the chatbots are getting smarter and better and more in context. And, you think about, an IVR system. So you call the help desk and it asks you a sequence of questions to get to the right person, right? Wouldn't it be nice if you had natural language up front that could get you to the endpoint? Just describe what you need up front. It'll get you to the endpoint without asking you 6 different questions where there's a pause and, validate your response. You're going to get quicker to the endpoint. So less friction. And that's always a good thing. So I see a lot of different applications, in that space for operations. And perhaps, over time we'll see, better automation, better activities with these chatbots to solve your, regular problems, so that our help desk can focus on the bigger problems. And that's, what I'd like to see is that we can get to a better space, where some of the common, easier problems are naturally solved with a good IVR system, chatbot system, where they're failing today.
Absolutely. And especially where, this allows the team to go focus on, as you said, the important things rather than repeating something, we
Right.
can actually automate it 100%. David, like we're almost coming to an end, and really I enjoyed the conversation and, a lot of knowledge and wisdom you shared with us today. So what's your advice, for, IT leaders who want to improve, their, IT management practices in general, and I would say, especially the endpoint management part.
Yeah, I think my number one point there is that you have to have a balance in security and user experience. And there's a lot of different controls that we talked about today that if you just go and implement them all tomorrow, we know, that'll be a change disaster, right? You have to manage change effectively with your user, and balance the speed in which you move, change through. So, that's a top priority. And it caught us a couple times in the past at NCR. We, removing, administrative capabilities on an endpoint. We went pretty aggressively with that, and it affected some of our software developers who happened to run code on their machine that has to install software. And oh, by the way, they didn't have administrative privileges on their machine to install that software. So it becomes a balancing act that you have to do on how you deploy security controls that remove that type of access. So that's just one example, but it's important that your business is successful and they can do the things that they need to do to get the job done. At the same time, you're improving your security posture. And I mentioned before that getting to passwordless and ID validation is a journey. So you may your ears peaked and you have a strong interest in getting to that endpoint now. How do you get there? I mentioned before that you just can't, turn a knob and turn it on. You might take steps to advance your security at the same time getting towards that endpoint, like, adaptive MFA I mentioned a couple times. But getting to that endpoint might require several steps in the middle, and you might get to that endpoint quicker with certain security ranks on risk ranks. For certain systems that have a higher risk, go faster, and that makes sense.
Absolutely. Finally, David, where people can find you? Are you on LinkedIn? Where they can get connected?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in LinkedIn, obviously. David Boscia, it's spelled Boscia. And David, it's just one word, no spaces after LinkedIn, but you can find me there with a quick search. And I'm looking forward to follow up and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you very much, David. I really appreciate the time that you shared with us today. It was really very informative and educative also as well. So, and I'm sure fellow IT leaders, wherever they are in their roles, whether they are in the world, they will benefit from knowledge that you shared with us today. And this is usually how I will end my episodes. So this is for the audience. If you just discovered this podcast by luck, thank you for passing by. I hope you like it. If you did so, please subscribe and share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you are one of the people who keep following us, thank you very much for doing so. I really appreciate that, and keep sending me your comments and feedback also as well. Thank you very much for tuning in. We will meet again very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.